Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to the minigame podcast. Wow, didn't think I'd mispronounce podcast ever. Today is Friday, July 4th. So both last night and tonight I heard popping of fireworks, and so I doubt my microphone would pick up any of that, but I will just put that out there. We'll do a little bit of warm-up, maybe not an hour, and then we'll jump into the video game news, and then we'll scroll down the 24-hour peak concurrent list here in just a second. I did want to mention and show off, apparently 10 billion packs have been opened in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, so they're doing a whole event special for that, which, yes, people have made the argument that billion should really be million, because it is a hard thing to really just recognize that a billion isn't just 1,000 millions. Well, wait a minute, I think a billion is 1,000 millions. So, I don't know what the argument is. I know the Europeans talk about it differently, so yeah, ignore everything I've just said because I don't know what the point there is, but trillion, maybe. Yeah, a trillion is a million, which is probably the argument that's made. Regardless, yes, people are still playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is the point I was trying to make before I got on a tangent that wasn't even accurate. And it is still just going strong. But it is also something that I've long since lost any interest in completely. And I am definitely for the better for that. I don't inherently regret my time too much in playing Yu-Gi-Oh, but it was a massive amount of extra effort and time, although in fairness it also probably was getting me a lot of views and watch time, but maybe not anywhere enough fast enough, and that's a problem. I think, I don't know, I'm even looking at these, I think that's a problem that they don't really talk about, and they really don't mention as far as trying to be a YouTube content creator, is that you might get subscribers regardless of what kind of content you create. You might get views regardless of kind of whatever content you create, but you very possibly are going to be somebody like me who has made content for 10 years and is still not met their new higher standards to be in the YouTube Partner Program to even get the minimalist amount of ad revenue. So it's not really a career. And that's not just YouTube. That's, unfortunately, that's a significant amount of actual jobs out there, and what many people would call scam jobs that are out there too, and even jobs that do pay you enough for the amount of time and energy you put into it tend not to pay enough to make a good life out of that. And I think that is probably the best way people need to start discussing the idea of living wages, as we should get away from minimum wages in life, living wages, and we should talk about the appropriate level that you believe you and everyone around you should have as far as a lifestyle, and that you shouldn't believe that some people, well, in my opinion, you shouldn't believe that some people should just always struggle and always have barely enough. But yeah, there definitely are people that disagree with me on that point. This Unomasame Pretty Derby seems, for a mobile game that is on Steam, seems to be getting quite a high player base, but it's also worth pointing out that 30,000 is really all you need to get in the top 100. Almost halfway through the top 100 of the most peak players of any one game, because particularly, I guess, no, not particularly because of the Steam Summer Sale, which is still going on, but just in general, people play random games, and there's a wide diversity, way more than the top 100 of the games that are being played by 10,000 people here, 10,000 people there. And even the biggest AAA games are only getting up into the 50,000s or so. War Thunder up to 80,000. Power World almost up to 100,000 in one day. Then you have some long-term ones like GTA 5 Legacy, and then you have ones that are almost certainly full of bots like Banana, and let's face it, Counter-Strike 2 is probably full of bots also. So yeah, there's not really the best of pictures as far as trying to understand what people are actually playing, or trying to simplify the conversation as far as what people are actually playing, because people are playing everything and people are playing nothing at the exact same time. People play games often for a very short amount of time and then move on to the next thing. The summer sales and big sales on Steam certainly contribute to that when you have a huge backlog. And certainly if you look over the 10 years of my content, almost none of it has been competitive or relevant to the current time frame, with the card games like Yu-Gi-Oh! Being perhaps exceptions to that. So when I'm playing an old single-player game experience from a game that's 5 years old, it's no surprising it wouldn't be at the top 100. But I've also tried to play things like Control as close to the release date, and that footage also doesn't get much coverage either, because too many people try that. So I'm not sure if anything really works other than getting really lucky with the YouTube algorithm, that random and crazy system that is unexplainable. As far as most wishlist games, I said last week when we started to show off this, there is a high chance that we're going to just scroll down this list fairly quickly, because I don't think that this list is going to change too much day to day. There really is no reason why it should change too much day to day other than an announcement of new games, and I don't think today is going to be one of those days in which we get announcements of new games or listings of new games on Steam in particular, versus today just being more follow through and follow up with Microsoft laying off a ton of people and such similar stories. I'm sure we might hear a couple more of those. I'm still trying to do something with my cough, and I opted to try an experiment by playing another hour of Command & Conquer right before this, which was probably a mistake. I probably should take at least an hour break in between starting a live stream that's going to be 2 or 3 hours long and doing any pre-recorded footage, but I am in this weird spot, particularly in the summer, where my sleep schedule's all messed up again. I'm waking up fairly late in the afternoon. I made like 2 episodes by pushing it today of Command and Conquer. I spent most of yesterday just trying to bathe, and that was basically all the energy I had, and I already feel sweaty and sticky today, which, yeah, that perhaps speaks to just how incredibly unhealthy I am. But also, I've been trying to save money by turning down my air conditioning, which I think inherently might be a zero-sum game, because then it's going to just increase my water bill for how that went. But yeah, tired and sweaty, as gross as that may be, is basically the situation I feel like, and I'm not accomplishing too much otherwise. I've been fiddling with my Tuya 5 GHz presence sensor for my bathroom, and I've been having a real hard time getting it to just trigger once. A lot of times things want to trigger 2 or 3 times in a row, and yeah, I don't want it to really do that, but it doesn't have a really just blatantly obvious "this is how this would work" system to send a message when you are within a certain distance of the sensor versus with outside of a certain distance of the sensor. There is perhaps a way in which that would send a signal if there wasn't kind of a significant delay before it decides that there is nobody around. So you can kind of walk into a room and it will see you, and it will trigger and potentially turn on lights as soon as it sees you within maybe 5 seconds at most, which is still kind of a long time. But then if it sees you're walking towards the door the other direction and leaving, it doesn't really have that consistent knowledge of, say, if you're getting closer or further, as far as an easy way to program that, or to say, hey, you've gotten a certain distance, so let's turn off the lights since you've gotten far enough away. And you can adjust how far it senses. So eventually, yes, it will say, hey, I don't see you at all once you get past a certain distance, but that is on a delay. And the minimum delay on that is like 5 seconds. In reality, you might as well add another 30 seconds to that, because to your smart home device cloud automations are slow and can be delayed up to 30 seconds at any point. Which, yeah, that is something that I've heard other people certainly complain about as far as smart devices. Speaking of the bathroom, I saw this gadget. It probably isn't going to work, where it's a little piece of plastic designed specifically to take a multi-bladed razor, although I imagine you could use a regular razor, a safety razor setup. You couldn't use a flat blade razor on it, probably. But it's designed to take something like a Mach 3 razor and push the razor while it's dirty with little hairs and shaving cream downward, and it will squirt a little bit of water from a reservoir through the razor, which, yeah, decent chance it won't work, but if it does, that could potentially save a lot of water, and I'd love to save a lot of water there, because I do often, and I imagine most people do when they're shaving their faces, sit there for 10-20 minutes with hot water just pouring out of the faucet because they're not willing to turn the faucet on and off every single time, or plug the sink and fill the basin of the sink, which frankly would feel a little gross to me, although this little device is not doing much different in that case. Here we again can look at the gotcha sales, although before we do anything, let's see if we can squeeze them in a little bit more. I did see a news update from Madoka Magica, Magi, etc. in that in this summer, so probably not too far from now, they are going to release their game on Steam, which, okay, even from day one, it has always felt like they have been trying their best to kind of rush the process, and they of how, when I suspect are failing gacha games and mobile games go. Last month, Madoka Magica dropped the furthest compared to any other game on this list, so boy do I know how to pick them as far as an example, and certainly I can see why it fell so much. It just doesn't offer a great experience. Although, in fairness, the Cardcaptor Sakura game, which is also a gacha game, which has probably been out for maybe 8 to 12 months now, I don't believe is on this list at all. And I don't think I've ever seen it on this list, which probably speaks to a heavy lack of advertisement too. But yeah, it coming to Steam almost means nothing though. Plus it means anybody that came to the game new with it coming to Steam are probably going to be somewhat far behind, although you could probably catch up pretty easily. I almost wonder if maybe that is the trick of some gacha games, is to hope that there's a secondary audience that comes in later and then wants to spend money to catch up with the hardcore day one players like me. But yeah, you still are going to have a weird situation with streaming and have to be in streaming mode to show off Madoka Magica, and it's not going to be an interesting experience to show off anyways. So I can't help but wonder if they are just rushing through things that they had planned to do and already put work into before eventually they just say, hey, we're shutting down the servers completely. I'm still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket. They have a solo event going on right now, and still playing Memento Mori, which is still doing its thing. But it's still very much a case where no mobile games really are worth the time. Speaking of not being worth the time, I'm increasingly running into problems where YouTube is recommending me more and more not Cardcaptor Sakura, but cracking the cryptic Sudoku puzzles that are too hard for me to actually be able to figure out and solve. My success ratio on them are really like 1 out of 8, maybe even 1 out of 16. But the amount of time I'm putting into them is often at least 5 minutes to an hour. So there is just a lot of wasted time happening there. Yeah, although at the moment I can't really complain about wasted time because there's nothing else I really feel like I physically can do. If I'm lying down in bed, I'm coughing my lungs out. If I'm sitting up right, I'm often coughing my lungs out. So until this cough goes away and I start feeling a little bit sprier. Forgot to close all the duplicate tabs. Let's go ahead and click that button and do that now. It'll automatically close 161 things. Really haven't made any progress on redoing the programming so that I can perhaps have my news stories open better. But that is on the short list. Although also on the short list increasingly is to go ahead and build that computer that I've been talking about for months now, because yeah, end of Windows 10 is getting closer and closer. Of course, the Prime Day sale is coming up. Hopefully I don't waste too much money on that, but I am keeping an eye on it every day and just kind of looking at what items are what. I just bought a new mattress for like $300, and there literally is now slick deals for a foam mattress, even though I got a hybrid mattress for like $180. So yeah, but it was a 12-inch compared to a 14-inch for a hybrid mattress. So, and the springs and hybrid mattress thought maybe will work better in the long run. Although, I don't know. It doesn't really feel particularly comfortable. I recall when I got my previous foam mattress about 10 years ago, it felt great. And I was like, oh, this is just a completely different experience compared to box springs or hybrid mattresses with springs in it. The technology has changed quite a bit in the past couple decades. But maybe I actually do need the support of springs in a hybrid mattress. But maybe not. I don't know. Still playing Command and Conquer. Yeah, and it's basically all I can really say is I'm doing the first expansion Covert Ops, and the levels seem to be incrementally just one tiny step better than the main game experience. One thing that did occur to me though is that Command and Conquer basically has only one gameplay style for all of its missions. It's build up your troops and attack en masse when you've overpowered and overwhelmed the enemy. And you can do some tricks to slow down the progress of your enemy's build so you can overwhelm them, such as destroying their harvesters. On a rare occasion, you'll get I've seen 2, maybe 3 levels where you aren't building up troops and you just start with a certain amount of troops and then you have to rush and push with that certain amount of troops to get to a point to either rescue something or collect something or just defeat the enemy. So you do have that slight this is what you get playstyle, but it is hardly a 50-50 split. And it occurred to me, while you have probably something like a sandbox you can do in the map editor to build a base and be real fancy on that, they really didn't think of another trick where they could have given you a mission every now and then where you have like 5 minutes to build up your base before it gets attacked, and then you prevent the player from making any kind of military vehicles or troops, and that way you only have defensive capabilities, and so you're going to spend those 5 minutes building up your defensive capabilities, and then if you survive another 5 minutes of attack, then you have a 10-minute level there, which is actually really short compared to most Command and Conquer levels that would play very differently from the rest of Command and Conquer. I guess that technically wouldn't be under the Conquer banner, though it would be very much more commanding if it was a defense mission. But yeah, I still have this hope, and my fuzzy memory tells me it's true, that when I get to Red Alert, it will be significantly better. That being said, it's 4 days till the Prime sale. The whole idea of starting to play Command and Conquer was to distract me from the Prime sale and to a lesser extent the Steam Summer sale. It's really not doing that because it's not that interesting. And I guess maybe if I put my head down, I might get into Red Alert, but then it's going to be really, really tough to want to play Red Alert after doing the Tiberian Dawn first Command and Conquer game that they called Tiberian Dawn, just back to back. Just playing 2 Command and Conquer games is really asking a lot. On top of which there are 2 expansions for the Tiberian Dawn, so we are doing the first one at the moment. So yeah, I don't think that plan is going to work particularly well. In retrospect, I should probably just play Binding of Isaac. That is a game that always keeps me enthralled and takes up a lot of my time. Plus, Binding of Isaac would be a great game to play right now while I have a cough, now that I think about it, because I can stay fairly quiet while playing Binding of Isaac, and just say, hey, I've already made a lot of footage of Binding of Isaac, so I don't really need to repeat myself and say the same thing over again. As far as the Steam Summer Sale, it is still going, and it seems like nothing has changed, which, in fairness, Steam is really good about that, in that nothing does change during the sale. So, the Prime Day sale is on 8th, this ends on the 10th. So you have an overlap here of fun things you want to buy versus potentially less fun things you may need to buy or want to buy from Prime or from any other store that is going to have similar sales at the same time that the Prime Summer Sale happens. Yeah. I've also been watching some streaming still. There's this sci-fi show that I watch on Hulu called Surreal Real Estate. It is the weirdest show ever in that it feels like it kind of wanted to be something like Supernatural, but sci-fi is incapable of making something like Supernatural. And by the end of the latest season that Hulu has, it started to feel very much like Ghostbusters, in that they literally had like a proton pack type gun and were shooting ghosts and capturing them. But also in the last season they're introducing the idea of a death anthropomorphized character, just like Supernatural did, and demon-like characters, just like Supernatural did. So they definitely feel like they're going more in that direction, but they still are weirdly tied into this idea of being a real estate agents first and foremost, which is just kind of an excuse for them to have a new set every week in a new location and find ghosts. It's not a terrible idea, but it's probably terrible on the budget to say, hey, every week we're going to a different house where there's a different ghost. Which eventually, even Supernatural gave Sam and Dean the bunker because they were tired of wasting the budget redecorating the same set over and over again to look like hotel rooms. Which that really doesn't make any sense, that they would constantly drive back to a bunker over and over again. They didn't even bother to make like a magical explanation as to how they were getting back and forth from the bunker when they were supposed to be on this road trip across the United States. You know, weirdly, Supernatural never did go to Mexico or Canada or anything like that. I'm not sure they even went to California or the West Coast. Which, yeah, I guess leaves them a lot of opportunity to potentially do something, but I'm not sure what they could do. CW being part of WB and the Warner Brothers now being a mess, part of Discovery. I don't think we would ever see anything like that. So anyways, yeah, Surreal Real Estate is also weird in that the main actor guy just is not really pretty enough to be the main protagonist actor guy or that good of an actor, so it feels weird in that way. But yeah, I've been watching that. I was watching a really awful anime about I maxed out my farming stats or something was the name of it, and yeah, the first season of that ends nowhere and does absolutely nothing, just really terrible. Weirdly, I haven't gotten back to Ranma 1/2. I do think in the past couple days I did sit through Zardoz on Prime Video. Just wanted to watch that again to see if it was as awful as I once remembered, and yeah, it's still pretty awful. And it's not as so bad as good type awful, it's just kind of awful. And yes, there's a lot of hippie era 70s 60s toplessness in it, so you can see some boobs, but you're basically seeing the boobs of women who would be your grandmother, if not great grandmother at this time, and that tends to not be that exciting. And you have to counter out the thought of seeing boobs with the fact that you're also seeing the main protagonist character, who is a rough sight to see, I would say. Trying to remember the actor's name. It's not George Clooney, he's much older than that. So, is everything still available as far as Steam Decks here? Yes, I believe everything still is. So, you didn't see any huge amount of demand increase on the Steam Deck during the summer sale, or at least not enough that they had to say they were going to stop selling the units. It would be, I guess, interesting if Valve came back after the sale and said we sold more units in that time period than ever before. But yeah, I saw a YouTuber that I follow kind of review Mario Kart World and was very disappointed with it. Just not really a lot to do as far as gameplay wise. Definitely said he thought it should have been closer to a $50 game, not a $60, $70, or $80 game. And yeah, that is certainly some rough footing to launch your console on, if that is a feeling that many people are going to share, that Mario Kart World in itself is not much of an experience. There probably is a bit of a problem in making your launch title, your pack-in launch title with a console, be something that requires multiplayer, because I don't think you can take your copy of Mario Kart World and then share some Mario Kart code to other people's Switch 1s for them to play multiplayer with you. So only the elite kids that have a Switch 2 can play against each other. And since that player versus player is a heavy focus on Mario Kart in general, you've just created a really bad situation. Whereas it would have made a lot of sense had there been more of a single player launch game like Mario Odyssey for the Switch 1, where people can play that to their heart's content and don't have to rely on their friends having Switches also. It's almost like you should probably have come out with games like Mario Kart World the year after the launch, where this is the big game now, convincing the people who couldn't get their hands on a Switch 2 to buy a Switch 2. Alright, well, I don't know how well my macro ran today, but I wouldn't really be confident that it ran perfectly. Yeah, I'm feeling rough today too. Yep. Trying to adjust my air conditioner and fan in the middle of the heat, and humidity changes everything, and feeling sick in the first place changes everything. So yeah, I don't really have any other warm-up to do, and I was trying to start later anyways in the hopes of getting more views. So let's go ahead and jump into the Video Games Chronicle news. Xbox producer has been criticized for suggesting laid-off devs should AI for career planning and emotional clarity. The now deleted post attracted criticism for the game industry. Yeah. This is the level of insanity and uncaringness that people have. Even middle managers like producers have. It is shocking. Yep. If I felt a little bit better, I might go into a whole rant that the greed is good mentality has become this religion that needs to literally just be outlawed, and that the idea of greed itself does seem to just corrupt. And what's the phrase? Capitalism corrupts. Yeah, it's not just that it corrupts societies as a whole, governments, it corrupts individuals. And so even having a little bit more than others seems to breed not compassion or but an anti-solidarity, for lack of a better term, between fellow mans. And then even middle managers seem to be built into it. Now, it may be a chicken and an egg situation where the most narcissistic or narcissist-like people tend to become managers of some sort, and I think we have seen actual statistics to say that is the truth of it. Yeah, maybe in some timeline we might even get lucky and AI will be less insanely evil compared to managers. Overall, let's see. So apparently this was Matt Turnbull, let's name and shame him, who made games like Crackdown 3, which went over budget and was not done well, State of Decay 2, which I don't think did amazingly well, and Forza, which is barely even still a franchise. Yeah. Maybe it was phrased in a different way, but in the end, mentioning AI, even though that is the reason in the minds of so many of these managers to justify laying off people, or at least it's a excuse that is being used to justify laying off people to shareholders, which, let's face it, a big part of this would go away if companies were not allowed to be public, or if there was just severe limitations on that. Of course, none of that is actually going to happen. In fact, the Build Back Better bill was just signed into law, so it seems like corporations will probably get more tax cuts and have even more loopholes to jump that they can exploit. But yeah, at a certain point, when a king no longer needs his subjects, which let's think of a corporation as a king in this case, then you do become just a mad king dragon sitting on a pile of gold. just keeping around cronies and your friends and things like that to keep you from being too lonely. But even then, they eventually end up becoming lonely because you can't be so antisocial that you're laying off thousands of people and not have that eventually affect you. Anyways, moving on. Again, I'm just not up to it to even make the rants. Let's see. Nintendo Switch 2's launch game reveals its developer. Nintendo has been secretive around the game's developers of its recent games. Recent games? I think Nintendo has always been fairly secretive of its developers. If anything, the demand to figure out who is, or at least what team is working on projects, is forcing them to reveal more than they would like. Let's see. So apparently the welcome tour was made by a company, a first party team previously known as Indie Cube, best known for its work on the Mario Party series. I guess we'll just leave it at that. Seems like Capcom still hasn't learned its lesson. A Resident Evil strategy game will be revealed next week from the Kingdom Hearts co-creator. Resident Evil Survival Unit will be revealed during a live stream event. I don't want to poop on the idea of a Resident Evil game on mobile, even though that is a very justifiable first knee-jerk reaction, but it's hard not to. I suppose maybe if there was just a completely different play style for mobile, if it was a like base builder, or I don't know, if you could really do a gacha game for Resident Evil, that would be kind of crazy. But yeah, you could be a base builder, it could be more of a strategy thing. But it also is very possible that this is just one of what seems to be an increasing number of mobile games that are just getting licenses and slapping their names on projects, which is probably the only way to even have any success, is to be some kind of mobile game developer. If you are a mobile game developer, make a game and then say, hey, let's now sell this pitch of this idea so that we can reskin it and make it something else. They're calling it a survival horror strategy game, and this indicates to me that very possibly it's going to be a top-down strategy game. Something where you're going to build a base and then it's going to take like 24 hours for the base to finish construction, and then you can pay premium currency that would cost real world money to speed up the building of that base. And it's questionable how any of that is really going to feel related to Resident Evil, though, and why anybody would actually care, which they almost certainly won't. Honestly, the bigger story here is Kingdom Hearts co-creator is doing something pretty low level as far as quality, instead of potentially working on the next Kingdom Hearts. Let's see, Mind's Eye Boss reportedly claims internal and external saboteurs are to blame for the studio's woes. It feels like the Mind's Eye Boss may be a little bit paranoid, but I mean, I'm sure there are some people that weren't really trying too hard to make the game succeed, but nobody really benefits by a game just being absolutely awful, and this really just does seem like it is paranoia setting in, and probably am looking for any kind of scapegoat you can possibly find. I don't know what you do with a game like this, though. Like, what everybody else would have done for a game like this is they would have just canceled it, never released it, and taking it as a huge loss and moved on to the next project. But this effectively was the next project from an already failed project, so shutting the company down and just canceling the game really would have been your best bet. And certainly would have made the boss come off bad, but not anywhere as bad as this. You just cannot grab success from a pile of failure. It's just not there. So I don't know how you would have made a game like how you would have made this game work. At a certain point, maybe I would have experimented with a change in genre completely and said, hey, let's stop making the video game aspect of this. Let's instead have everybody script this for our story. Take the story that's already written, the voice acting that's already done, the animation that's already done, and said, hey, we're going to clip this together and make some kind of animated short, and then we're going to try and sell it to Netflix or some other streaming service. At the very least, you cut your losses there, and you could say, well, we did something with it, versus just going out of business. It's weird that that never really happens, because there's actually a decent number of games, even from a decade or two ago, that had you stripped out the gameplay and just made it a animated short or a movie, then you could have sold it in that fashion. Because particularly nowadays, with all the effort and money spent on cutscenes and animation, you should have at least 40 minutes of content. Yeah. Something where you could do something. Even if you could just get it on YouTube and run YouTube ads, that would be something. Moving on, PlayStation hit Helldivers 2 is officially coming to Xbox with crossplay. Crossplay will be with all three platforms. It has been confirmed. So that'd be PS5, PC, and Xbox Series X and S. Okay. People are still playing Helldivers 2. I don't think people have had any huge controversy with it, although there have been a few minor controversies. And yeah, I could see it staying around for a decent amount of time, although I'm not sure it is actually going to be as long-tailed as something like Destiny 2. Let's see. John Romero's next first-person shooter has lost its funding in the wake of the Microsoft cuts. Romero Games says it's exploring its options for its unannounced first-person shooter. So is he at a subsidiary, or is Romero Games just getting some kind of funding? Let's see. Romero Games has announced that its next unannounced project has lost funding, with a now ex-Romero Games employee claiming it was due to the Microsoft cuts. So, the main thing I would really want to know is Romero Games a subsidiary of Microsoft? I don't recall it being a subsidiary, but honestly, if I looked at the entire list of Microsoft subsidiaries, it's going to be a much longer list than I recognize. Here we have an update. Romero Games employees has claimed the whole studio is being let go as a result of Microsoft cuts, with many advertising on LinkedIn that they've lost their job. Interesting. And names like John Romero are very recognizable, but I'd have to kind of think specifically as far as what they've done recently or what they've done in the past. it does seem like there is a pattern here in that Microsoft is increasingly trying to shutter its offices abroad. And yeah, perhaps that is a case where some of these tax avoidance schemes no longer work or no longer necessary in the United States. So having an office in Ireland may not be necessary. Plus, it does create this whole weird difficulty. If they were thinking exclusively from artistic perspectives, having offices around the world makes a lot of sense, though, because one sec. Because, yeah, the odds that all of the talented game developers are going to be willing and able to live in Redmond, Washington, or Seattle, Washington, United States are zero. And if Microsoft actually cared about having talented people, which it seems like they don't, and they just think everything is going to be replaced by AI, and at a certain level, Microsoft may just want to be very much like EA, in that they feel like they can make enough money by continuously making mediocre games. But yeah, the fallout from the layoffs, no pun intended, continues to happen. The Dying Light developer has reportedly canceled 2 games. The Polish developer announced it was working on an RPG in 2022. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case, considering how Dying Light 2 really didn't succeed that well, and I don't really know if the Techland is the name of the company has it in them to make a pure RPG game. Sure, the zombie survival RPG games of Dying Light are similar enough to RPG games, but yeah, an open world fantasy or action RPG game is a very different thing. They could be seeing something like Expedition 33 and saying, hey, that's too close to what we were thinking, and that is just way better. It's better to hear games are being canceled than to hear games are being canceled and layoffs are happening. Unfortunately, it almost is always the same announcements that both are happening at the same time. But I don't know what Techland can really do. They can try and double down and make a Dying Light 3 that is just somehow better than Dying Light 1, and or they can try to make something new and see what works. The idea of games being canceled in itself isn't a terrible thing, in the same way that people should have ideas and then try them out, and if they're not working, cancel them. I often say back burner them, just stick them in the back of your head, and then maybe a few years down the line bring them back as an idea. Of course, financially and management wise, they say canceling for budget reasons, but there's really no reason to stick with bad games. I can't help but feel like Sea of Thieves is an example of a bad game concept that at the core of it was only going to make a minimal amount of people happy, most of which were people who worked at Microsoft, but was never going to become the next big thing or an completely different style of gameplay. Pirate game experiences have never been super popular, and if you were going to do any kind of gambling on different types of gameplay experiences, you probably should go back to some of the older styles of gameplay. Anything old could become new again, as much as something new could become new. That could be the new hotness. But yeah, for the most part, people want first-person shooters, particularly from Microsoft. Let's see. Heavy Metal Death Can is a PlayStation 1 inspired zombie survival horror set in the 1970s submarine. The game combines vintage Resident Evil tank controls and a heavy metal soundtrack, which, yeah, that seems weird to be set in the 1970s and have heavy metal playing. I don't think there was a lot of heavy metal quite yet in the 70s. And then being in a submarine. Yeah. Well, that is an interesting thing, to say the least. Yeah. I did run my macros to make the YouTube shorts, or really all I'm doing is making the list of YouTube shorts that I'm going to make later longer. And I checked to see if my check marks were working. And as far as I can tell, they are working, so I don't know why I occasionally see games that are just not checked that feel like they should be checked. It may very well just be my own personal feelings there. And then our last Video Games Chronicle article for today is Xbox insists that Phil Spencer is not retiring anytime soon. Phil Spencer became the CEO of Microsoft in 2022 as part of an almost 40-year career at Microsoft. It is crazy how long people work. It would be interesting, certainly, if their mandatory retirement ages were ever implemented. The average age for a human I saw on a meme is about 72, maybe 76, I think. Yeah, 76. And so middle age is 38 years old. If you're going to have a midlife crisis at the age of 38, and working until you're 65 or 70 is really admitting that you're going to probably be unhealthy for about 6 years at most before you die. And so when you think about that, and then you balance that with like Social Security averaging out your highest paying 35 years to determine whether it's going to pay you, which I wouldn't trust Social Security these days to pay you anything, but assuming it's still around and pays out, it is really making just an insane assumption that half of your life, basically, you're supposed to be working a job. And is that really what we want for humanity? Unfortunately, it's what we have for humanity, but is it what we really need, or is it really what we want? Because that is a lot of time. There's a lot of time to have people who maybe start at the age of 20 working for 35 years and then enjoying as much as they can enjoy their decrepit old age at 55. Yeah. It's not really a good situation. Anyways, that has very little to do with this. Are they going to ever say that Phil Spencer is going to retire until they're ready to say that? No. Absolutely not. Sarah Bond is an African American woman who's fairly young, so her getting promoted would come off with some controversy to some people. But yeah, she hasn't been very prominent and put in front anyways. And I wouldn't be surprised if Sarah Bond actually gets promoted just outside of the Xbox division completely and becomes some kind of chief financial officer for all of Microsoft. I do think Phil Spencer probably will retire relatively quickly. There's kind of no reason to stay around. He's doing all these layoffs now, which probably is clearing the field for whoever is in charge next to not have to come in and be the bad guy. But yeah, it, on top of being statistically more likely to be a narcissist, management people also statistically seem to, well, in my opinion, seem to be more obsessed with working and make their whole personality about working, and they just don't really have friends or family or any kind of outside work life balance. So they do want to tend to stay around. And you see that with even like Reggie Fils-Aimé of Nintendo of America, formerly of Nintendo of America, still showing up in the game industry, still occasionally saying something or taking interviews, when really he is completely out of the industry and should just either enjoy his retirement or wherever else he might be working. But yeah, if I was going to put a time on it, just to roughly guess, we're probably going to see at least another 4 years of Phil Spencer before Sarah Bond replaced him, assuming Sarah Bond is still around at that point, just because they need that much time to launch a new console and establish her as the new leader. I would assume we'll just see her at more directs and her get on stage and make more announcements more and more. On the other hand, there's been a lot of people on like YouTube's creator channel that come and go like crazy, and so there's just like no consistency year over year as far as who is the person that is going to be the figurehead for YouTube content creators' YouTube channel, and who is going to look like they're the authoritative person in charge. They tend to love to cycle the people in and out, so it doesn't really give any air of authority to anybody. They could certainly do that too. But yeah, I would definitely expect somewhere around the next 4 years, Phil Spencer is going to take the blame and take charge of launching the next console unit, whether it's a handheld unit or something else. They have to announce something, because it would be kind of ridiculous to say, hey, we're not making another home theater device that is designed to plug into a home theater and do high resolution 4K graphics. And so they're going to stay around so he can take the blame or the claim success from that, which inherently that hardware is probably in development at the moment, and he's going to stay around if there needs to be any more layoffs. So assumingly he would want to leave a pretty blank slate, or at least a good situation for the next CEO, in that they could come in and say, everything that's happened up until this point is not my fault, and the only thing you can start blaming me for is going to be games that are coming out in the next 4 to 8 years, because that's when my decisions are gonna actually start finally being revealed. Which, yeah, there is a whole scheme there, certainly, since it takes so long to develop a game, that you can blame a lot of the current failures on the previous administration. Same happens in movies, same happens in politics. Things that take too long can always just be blamed on the previous people. Blame the previous guy, promise the moon. Moving on to Gamatsu news. It is interesting, however, that the previous CEO of Xbox has just been oddly quiet. But what is he really going to say? I mean, anything he says is not going to really matter. A action roguelike dating simulation game called Hell Heartbreaker has been announced for PC. It looks visually similar to the Has-Been Hotel and Hell of a Boss animators style. Honestly, that may very well just become a style in itself as far as the font and logo. The actual anime chibi girls here don't look anything like the animation style of the characters there. And increasingly, just kind of question whether even a game like this, just because it's a dating sim, might not really be worth trying to even play due to YouTube family friendliness rules. Yeah, there's really just a chilling effect that the censorship that YouTube's policies have instills in content creators like me, or me in particular. Let's see. Moving on, Zenless Zone Zero version 2.1 update. The impending crash of waves launches July 16th. What's interesting, I would say, about Zenless Zone Zero is I don't think it is on the gacha list. So, is it not a gacha game? Or is it doing worse than the top 100 as far as the list goes? And yet still continuously putting out content. Which at a certain point, the games kind of have to continuously put out content until they're fully ready to pull the plug, and they may have already plotted out and planned years of content. Which, yeah, wouldn't be surprising if most gacha games and mobile games have 2 or 3 years worth of planned content ready to go. And even when things get bad, such as Infinity Nikki has gotten bad, there's only so much they're willing to pivot and only so much they can pivot. A game called Nidana launches July 28th. It's already got a Steam page. It says it's a surreal, relaxing walking simulator game. So it doesn't seem particularly too involved. Aniplex, Joy City, and Capcom all together are working together to announce a Resident Evil survival unit for iOS and Android. I think Aniplex might be a subsidiary of Sony, and it might be one of those anime companies that's doing particularly bad at the moment. Let's see if we can see this picture. Yeah, it's not really showing anything at all. Let's see, Illusion of Itahari launches September 18th in the West. If I was to guess, this is probably an Otome visual novel. Yep. No surprise. It is perhaps a little surprising, though, that we're seeing it come to the West still. We still see some of that happen. Estonia's Hope, The Lost Delight, launches in November 13th in the West. These are probably from the same publisher. By the way, we talked about maybe a week or two ago Nexus mods changing ownership, and already we are seeing changes happening, although perhaps they were changes that needed to happen legally, in that they are now going to require age verification in European countries and other countries to install any of the adult mods on Nexus mods, which, let's face it, is most of the mods on Nexus mods. At least that's the joke. But yeah, I think there's going to be just this increasing global trend, not only on Nexus mods, but just everywhere on the internet and perhaps outside the internet, of increased requirements to access adult content and prove you're an adult and provide some personally identifiable information to prove you're an adult. That has a chilling effect once again as far as adult content goes. Moving on, Project Code M by Novect is going to be published by Access Games, which it's a long-awaited killing and solving detective adventure game from the House of Fate Morgana, Fata Morgana studio. The House of Fate Morgana is a Shakespeare book, I believe. don't have a Steam link here. Interesting. So, seems like Gematsu is dropping the ball as far as the Steam links. What was that first? What was that that said? Let's see. This video contains Japanese footage and not reflective of the final product. Okay. So yeah. We've got some music playing in the background while this trailer plays. Rhythmic with a lady with a gravelly voice singing. It is funny how the reality of these kinds of stories would be better depicted with their high level of blood and gore in more of an animation style, or possibly even live action, but there's just an unwillingness to go to those extremes in those forms, so then they become awkwardly squeezed into a system that just doesn't really make a lot of sense. The same was true for the Nonary series 999, and that there's just a lot of murder and blood and gore, and then the actual gameplay is solve these puzzles and talk through these visual novel dialogue trees. And I guess that's not exclusive to just visual novel video games or video games in general, because I suppose there's a lot more violence one can describe and create in your own mind when you're reading a book. But I think most book readers would argue that those kinds of stories as a novel, as a book, as a story actually work a lot better, because you're not cramming in puzzles and visual novel dialogue trees into a story that really doesn't need it. And I can't help but assume that there's a level of Japanese creators who really would have preferred to just make a manga or an anime or a light novel or something, and pitched the ideas completely to all the publishers in Japan, which I imagine there aren't too many of those, and just got rejected. So I don't know if there really is a lot of commercial independent publishing in Japan. It may very well be that a lot of these stories get picked up for cheap by visual novel programmers. Again, though, Project Code M is a great example of something I actually would be interested in playing, but then I also would be in a weird situation as far as just how after dark is the content, really. Which, yeah, that would be amazing if YouTube did launch an after dark concept where your videos are not scheduled by hour per se, but they are scheduled in a post watermark time frame of the region that the viewer is in. So for the United States, that would be somewhere around 9-10 p.m., maybe even 11. And then your videos can launch in that after dark time slot with less censorship or danger of a strike. But yeah, YouTube would never do that, because if they implied for a second that their rules were less strict than they already have been, people will take advantage of it, and it would just be straight up OnlyFans type porn on the after the dark content. Which, yeah, I guess if YouTube said that, if they said, hey, we're going full nudity is acceptable even in a sexual context, that would be interesting. Probably would never happen. And see, that would be the one thing where age gating would potentially be a good thing if all of a sudden age gates had to be implemented, is that if shows and streaming services were cool about that, but then you would also need the credit card companies to be cool with that, and that's the real problem, is that Visa and PayPal and all of them don't want to be moving money from places like OnlyFans. Moving on, the Otome Daioshi Fighting for Love is coming to the West in the spring of 2026. I also have a hard time as far as, see, NSW here is for Nintendo Switch, not NSFW for not safe for work. I had to double check that. Yeah. I'd be in a weird position trying to play an Otome game, not being a young maiden myself. That certainly, like, if I had money and could hire somebody, I could definitely find somebody who was just about who I could assign just playing Otome games all day, every day. I don't know if that would really get a lot of views though. And frankly, streaming visual novels itself is a little rough, because the visual novels themselves are not particularly varied, so the idea of watching somebody else play a visual novel is much closer to completely losing a sale and replacing the experience that people would have if they bought it and played it themselves. And yeah, the only real successful as far as visual novels that we've seen is the wild and crazy ones that are usually Western ones, such as, what is that, Reading Club visual novel experience. I forgot the name of it. Moving on, the Good Old Days launches this fall. Switch version published by Access Games in the West. I assume these are all announcements from Access Games. The Good Old Days. Kind of feels like it might be a little bit inspired by something like the Goonies. Which, yeah. We'll leave it at that. Cards with periods in between each letter RPG, the Misty Battlefield Physical Edition, launches this fall in the West. Which feels like that game has been out for a while. Yeah, well, it's been out since May of 2024. And this is the Misty Battlefield version. I think there's been a previous game called Cards even before that. And perhaps that also highlights where there's really just not a large enough player base to have more than a couple of card games succeed. Basically just Magic, Pokemon, and Yu-Gi-Oh! And then everything below that becomes incredibly niche. Let's see, the Tristia Chronicles have been announced for Switch, Tristia Legacy and Tristia Restore. Notice how one of these looks completely different than the other in the animation style. But yeah, we definitely have seen that become somewhat of a standard thing that's happened for a few games too, is that a game that sold fairly well is then assigned to a completely different team, and the team, instead of going with what have been 2000 era or 90s era anime styles, have just embraced 3D CGI chibi styles for their character designs. This character is just speaking in Japanese. Yeah. And then the actual gameplay seems like it very well may just be a management game, some kind of running a cooking facility or something. Yeah. So there's definitely been a case where there's been a split between the actual gameplay being these chibi 3D CGI characters and then cutscenes that are more traditional 2D animation. And honestly, I think in this game, second one, there may not even be any 2D animation. So this is just a Japanese take on something like Cook Serve Delicious, it looks like. Yep. And then just potentially reusing art from the first game. Although I can't really blame a developer for one selling via cheesecake and bikini shots every now and then, but I can't blame a developer for also saying, hey, this game was a success, so let's try and make another game using that success. But I definitely can blame a developer for saying a game was a success, so let's make a garbage, almost asset flip like game where we're just flipping our own assets to make a sequel, because you hurt the legacy, no pun intended, of a series. Yeah, I don't think that there's a lot of hope amongst the Tristia fans, if there are any Tristia fans, that a third Tristia game is going to be coming out and that it would be anything like this. It would probably be a lot more like this. Moving on, Q Collection has been announced for Switch. It includes Q Remastered, Q with VTubers, and Q2 Humanity. I don't recognize any of these games at all. But if we jump around here, it looks to me like it is probably a simple, it's a physics game of sorts with puzzles. So it feels kind of like a WarioWare with drawing physics on it. And then Q Humanity feels like it maybe is a multiplayer, or Q2. So yeah, I don't know if there's really an experience here worth having from the looks of it. And YouTubers here are basically VTubers. They're being depicted. Yeah. Color me unimpressed, really, as far as that game. Paths of Mystery, A Brush with Death, is coming to the West in 2026 also. This too is excess games. We might as well try and skip around and look at these trailers a little bit, just so we have a general idea of what is going on. Serial drama style mystery adventure. Yep. Visual novel mystery game. Some of these games have them speak, assuming you can even play them in their original Japanese dialogue, which I guess this one you can. They feel like they're nice middle steps if you were actually trying to learn Japanese, but I'm not sure how much they really help you without starting first and foremost by having a teacher, and a good teacher teach you Japanese if to read and write the basic words. Which, by the way, there is nearly 900,000 people as far as a population drop that happened last year in Japan. And yeah, their populace is just dropping like crazy, and their prime minister has said, hey, they're going to have to figure out some system to let immigrants in some way that the immigrants would not piss off the locals, who are notoriously pissed off by immigrants coming in. There is a major problem with having a rigid social structure based society like Japan, and a society in Japan that is uniform and has no other races really that they have to deal with, letting in immigrants from anywhere. A certain point, and this would be crazy and probably would never happen, there's two ends I see for Japan as their population declines, unless they can embrace universal basic income or something that would drastically change the attitude of people and encourage people to feel like they have free time and can afford to have kids, which, yeah, that would be a big thing. I feel like Japan is either going to have to heavily build up a not defense force but an attack force, an actual standing army of drones and robots, if they can do that, just to defend themselves from the eventual attempt of being annexed by mainland China. Or, and possibly maybe both of those things would happen, they're going to have to become really desperate and apply for annexation of some sort by some other country, which Japan and America, I mean, it kind of might make some sense, certainly, but UK and England also kind of make some sense. I don't know who else you could really apply for annexation unless you're just going to straight up allow China to annex you, which is also a possibility depending on who the leaders are. But yeah, nobody wants to give up their sovereignty, but the population decline in Japan is a problem until it stops being a problem. Right now it's seen as a problem though. Population decline is all over the world, but it is particularly high in Japan. Yeah. Let's see. Moving on, back to video games. Dungeon Stalkers adds a PS5 version, launches in early access on PC on August 13th. So we do have that Steam link. And yeah, looks like it might be something. Although it seems like it's got a little bit of dark screenshot syndrome, which it's been a long time since I've even used that phrase. But yeah, it's kind of hard to see as far as the visuals. A game called Destiny Rising launches August 28th. It's a free-to-play mobile game, I assume from the makers of Destiny. NetEase Games announced it, but I would assume this is officially licensed by Bungie, thus officially licensed by their parent company, Microsoft. Yeah. So, I guess the question is, what is the difference between playing Destiny Rising and just playing regular Destiny? Obviously, Destiny Rising runs on mobile, which might be a great experiment in showing that games like Destiny just really don't need to exist on overpowered consoles and PC to run fine, and that they just have become optimized. But I wouldn't be surprised if the levels are a bit more generic and smaller, if the physics and visuals are less, although that may not really be a problem to most. Yeah, I don't even know if this is supposed to be in the Destiny universe. It seems like it should be, but a lot of these characters and such just don't really feel like what I've seen of Destiny, which is very little, frankly. Maybe this is perhaps a mobile version of Destiny 1 instead of competing directly with Destiny 2. Yeah, particularly this group of people just don't feel like they are from the Destiny universe. And if anything, I would guess this is probably another example of a game that was in development and mostly already made, and then they just got the licensing for the name Destiny and slapped it on there. Now I don't know why this is here, Bendy Lone Wolf. It's to the left of the article here that says Bendy Lone Wolf launches August 15th. So yeah, I'm not sure why it's on the left side. Helldivers 2 is coming to the Xbox Series on August 26th. Okay. We had already talked about that. You can see Helldivers 2 is very popular, and apparently I haven't made a YouTube short on it. And in a weird way, I guess I'm starting to increasingly think about putting co-op games back on the fall list. Not because I personally am going to play them, but because the kid I gave a Steam Deck to and am doing Steam Family Share with is potentially going to play co-op at some point in the future. Although right now I don't think he's allowed to. And that does make sense considering his age. By the way, I have referred to him as a kid, but I suppose it is worth pointing out that I am actually related to the kid in some way. So, like, we are actually family. So Family Share is not being abused too much in this. Yeah, you only have 6 slots for Family Share anyway, so you'd have to be in a unique position that you're giving Family Share out to people you're not related to. But I could see if you had like free friends who you've been sharing a house with, like roommates, for a long time, and you effectively feel like family, you could do a Family Share inside that same house, and that would work fairly well. Your definition of family is very often different than others. Moving on, the Famitsu sales from the 23rd to the 29th have been updated. We saw the first 10 of them with a lot of non-Switch 2 games because there weren't a lot, but then still a ton of Switch 1 games. PS5, Death Stranding 2 being in the number 3 spot, and then Nintendo dominating until the 18th spot with Elden Ring Night Rain, Castlevania Anniversary Collection for the PS4 in the 20th spot as a brand new game, and then Nintendo dominating the rest of this. Which, yes, of the 30 games listed here, it does seem like 2 are non-Nintendo. So yeah, at what point do you really just say Nintendo has won the console war in Japan? At least. It definitely seems like they have. Definitely seems like it has been that way for a long time. And it's not only time for Xbox and Microsoft to think about a different way of doing things. It's time for Sony to think about a different way of doing things. Which, yes, perhaps the abandonment of consoles completely and maybe moving the handhelds, as this is the first generation of handhelds that are considered console-like. We may just not have too many other non-Nintendo things that need to be made or sold. Hardware-wise, you can see the Switch 2 is selling like hotcakes with 161,000 units in Japan, much higher than the Switch Lite and the Switch OLED models, which are obviously getting a bump up just because Switch 2s may have been out of stock for a brief second. So you have 3 tiers of Switches outselling the PS5 original version. PS5 original version is outselling the original Switch, but then the PS5 is being defeated by the original Switch, and the digital edition is being defeated. And the PS5 digital edition, frankly, is getting dangerously close to being defeated by the Xbox Series S, with the general assumption that all Xboxes in Japan are being bought by like military troops stationed in bases there from other countries. PS4 barely selling anything. It's a shame, though, that PCs and handhelds are not being thrown into this list, because if at any point Valve could come out and say, hey, the Steam Deck or the ROG Ally X sold 200,000 units this week, that would put a really interesting number out there to compare to the Switch 2. Which, yeah, Switch 2s in America, in the United States, seem to have been very prevalent and capable of being purchased, and it almost feels like they intentionally played up the idea that it would be hard to get them, so more people bought them. And I definitely feel like at this point there might be a lot of buyer's remorse going on right now, as people have bought them and potentially already finished the majority of their experience with Mario Kart World, and having little new to play on the Switch 2 are now stretching to try and find old games that they haven't already lost interest in. I don't know why I'm looking at my phone right now. I'm just too much of a shopaholic here. I'm trying to look at Slick Deals newsfeed. Again, I just feel a little off today. Let's see, UPen and iPen Universe launches July 17th. It's a Southeast Asia Village Life open world adventure game dated. And I would assume this is UPen and this is iPen based on the I on the t-shirt. Yeah, the U. So they pronounce it UPen and EPen. So this feels like this is some kind of Southeast Asian attempt at a cartoon that would become popular. Maybe it is popular on YouTube or something, but I haven't seen anything like this. And in fairness, all you need is a little bit of luck, and then you've got the next Bluey, which people talk about a lot, but I'm not sure people buy a lot around Bluey. Probably a decent amount, but They seem to imply that these characters are unique to this video game, and they're starting with a video game, which is a weird way to start. Definitely doesn't look particularly that interesting. They definitely look weird, even like in comparison to the other kids. They seem to be bald with maybe a little bit of a tuft of hair, giant big heads. Yeah, there's a YouTuber, part of a show called Trash Taste, which is a group of YouTubers who talk about anime, or at least originally did. They don't really do it nowadays. Called Garnt, Garnt. And so he's been talking about anime for a long time, and he weirdly put out this weird video on YouTube to surprise announce that he has written and directed some kind of anime or anime-like movie, which, boy, did that come out of nowhere. Imagine a better comparison for most people who's not familiar with Garnt, which he goes by the name Giguk, I believe. Imagine if PewDiePie came out and said, hey, I've been secretly making an anime movie, which honestly wouldn't be that surprising. It just would feel very odd and come out of nowhere. Although, in fairness, PewDiePie is doing some weird things, and he's really come out of the closet as being much more of a geek and started to show off a lot more STEM-style geek projects that he is doing. And yeah, he has recently fallen out of the top 10 most subscribed things, which was eventually going to happen because like the top 10 of most subscribed things tend to be corporations or groups of people. But yeah, PewDiePie is slowly becoming an old geeky man, which has to happen. You can't always just be the young guy. Moving on back to Gematsu articles. We're still going through Gematsu articles. Wow. Trails in the Sky, first chapter, details Ruan characters and places in the trailer. So I guess I'll say just check out this article if you're interested. It's games like this that actually I think I'm more irritated by the 3D 2D shift though, because you have very nice art in 2D, and then you have decent art in 3D, and so it just feels like it should be one or the other. And maybe in game it always is 3D art, and this is just concept art. But I really don't even want to see that if that's the case, because yeah, that's just inconsistent. And I guess I strive for consistency in a world that offers none. I guess I just have to learn to live with that. This is one of those games, though, that they're going to put out little bits of information over and over again. Once Human is coming to the PS5 and Xbox Series in 2026, which looks somewhat similar to a previous game we already looked at, but is not that game. Once Human is 74% positive overall, with it being 84% positive at the moment. Yeah. And I guess MMO free-to-play things in particular aren't going to make it to my follow list or wish list. I'll make a YouTube short on it because honestly, if somebody is going to want to play these are going to be kind of like free games always. There's a high chance that they'd always be free, and so it's slightly different than something that is more co-op focused. And probably I'm going to just be very inconsistent as far as what I put on the follow list and what I don't. Wonder Boy, Asha in Monster World is now available for the PS5, Xbox Series, and Microsoft Store for PC. I think it's been on Steam for a while. The Wonder Boy series, I think, has been around for a while, but also feels like it's probably not that big of a deal. It is on sale at the moment, so there is an argument to like adding it to a cart, which I'm assuming things are still in my cart. I'm hoping things are still in my cart, although I guess it doesn't really matter too much because I took a screenshot of everything in my cart, so recreating my cart would be pretty easy. And I'm still going to wait until at least 8th, probably the 9th, before I buy anything on the Steam sale, because I want to know how much I end up spending on the Prime Day sale. And yes, I have to remind myself I did just spend $300 on a mattress, and that was an unexpected cost too, so not really in a great position. Probably should be saving more money than I think to hire some kind of handyman to repair things. I'm pretty sure either the wiring in one of my walls is bad or the circuit breaker is bad. I would guess the circuit breaker is bad because it's tripping non-stop. Yeah, all kinds of little things. The good news is, going into the Prime sale, I don't have anything huge in my mind as far as something I need, but it won't be anything huge. It'll be a tiny bunch of little things. Anyways, I want to go through gaming on Linux, but I think I'm going to be better off if I take a break now. And man, every single time when I am just about to record, pause the recording, I realize I have not remembered to even start to think about programming it to automatically mute my mic when I pause the recording. Yeah, man, I don't know why it always slips my mind. It is very much, I guess, a lot of my thoughts are based on the situation, and that a lot of how my brain works is it just compartmentalizes things and then locks it off for better focus, which sometimes is helpful but often isn't. Anyways, I'm going to take a break and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm feeling really off today. Like, more than usual, which unfortunately usual is way too high. Yeah. Yeah. Aches and pains and everything. Yeah. Anyways, video game news is what we're supposed to be going through, so let's go through the Gaming on Linux articles. OpenMW 0.49 arrives to enhance Morrowind, and they are looking to support later Bethesda games. Around 3 years of development went into OpenMW, which I assume stands for Morrowind. But yeah, this is not the Oblivion remaster by any means. And I'm not 100% sure if Morrowind isn't the second Elder Scrolls game, since the first one would have been Elder Scrolls Arena and would have basically not even been anything like Skyrim or Oblivion. Yeah. It is crazy that the way things have gone with Microsoft owning Bethesda in particular and all of that. In that if I was in charge, I would have definitely on day one said, hey, we need a soft reboot. Let's make a new game just called Elder Scrolls. Let's make that be the soft reboot that fills in the gap and retells the events of Elder Scrolls Arena and possibly Morrowind in particular, and possibly even just bundles in Oblivion also. And clearly they did make a remaster for Oblivion, but it's taken them a long time to accomplish just that one thing. And a big part of that is probably because they let Bethesda be in charge of the projects. But yeah, Microsoft has really failed to utilize their staff, and now they are laying off their staff. This clearly is a management issue, not an employee issue, which is almost never the case that it's an employee issue. Speaking of management issues, seems like on Hulu there's this new Gordon Ramsay show called Secret Service for Fox TV channel, which is basically just bar rescue, except for it's Gordon Ramsay doing a kitchen rescue type show. Although I don't think it's so much going to be as harsh as Kitchen Nightmares is, and I think it probably will just evolve somewhat to be the exact same thing as bar rescue, which at a certain point maybe they should be paying some license to John Taffer for the idea. The one thing in the first episode I watched of Secret Service is that Gordon Ramsay definitely looks particularly old, and he made a big deal about having an insider leaking information to him about how things are really done. And so there was just this big focus on, in secret, they were pretending like they were going to record a different type of show, and then Gordon Ramsay walks in and says, no, you're on a completely different type of show. But unlike Bar Rescue, no real tips on how to cook or run a restaurant was shown. No experts really coming in and doing any retraining on that first episode, and these things could always evolve more, but it really felt like the pilot episode, assuming the first episode is the pilot episode, was very much pitching an idea that had not been fully fleshed out. And the big problem, certainly, with trying to do something like Bar Rescue on Fox is just going to want to give notes and interfere with it way more than Paramount TV is going to interfere with Bar Rescue, since that's the only successful show they have on the entire channel. But yeah, even Bar Rescue has hit a point where John Taffer is so old that he's really not being involved as much. But yeah, it's time for some new celebrity chefs or celebrity people to take over these kinds of shows. So I guess we have more wind here because of that Gaming on Linux article. Yeah. Morrowind is the third game in this series of the Elder Scrolls series. Oblivion the fourth, Skyrim the fifth. So what is the second game? I think it's something like Daggerfall or something. But I can't remember the real name. Yeah. See if this bundle maybe tells us what games. I don't think Elder Scrolls 2 is on Steam. That was the guess. Nope. Oblivion, Morrowind, and Skyrim are only in this bundle. I thought some of my coughing might have to do with acid reflux, but I don't see a lot of evidence on that, because I was coughing for like an hour after basically not eating anything at all before I started streaming. I've been streaming now for 2 hours and I'm still coughing, and I've basically eaten nothing in those 3 hours. I am drinking water, but if that is triggering acid reflux, that's a big problem. Of course, there is a danger that this cough is some indicator of a big problem, but probably not. Probably just old and then healthy. We all get that way eventually. Proton 10.0-2 gets a small release candidate update for Linux, SteamOS, and Steam Deck. Let's see if there's anything particularly interesting here. Let's see. They've disabled Exalia for Rockstar's launcher because it seems to be not necessary. And then fixed windowing regression. Made Rhyme not behave correctly when alt-tabbing. Yeah. Well, as the summer, I'm thinking, although I probably would never act on it, on the idea of having electric rolling shades / shutters outside of all of my windows on my house. It could potentially help in a hailstorm or something like that to reduce the risk of windows being broken. Not that the risk is super high, but that overall would help for cooling. But the programming would take some time. Certainly, if you have shades outside of a window, then the shades will get hit by the infrared light and heat up on the outside, where if you have shades inside of a window, where they more traditionally are, well, the shades can look nicer and fancy and protect a little bit as far as reflecting some of the light back through the glass and some of the infrared light back through the glass. The vast majority of heat is the infrared light, not the visible spectrum light, but nowhere as much. And yeah, it may very well be the case that your shades are just absorbing the majority of the light and then transferring that to heat and transferring the heat into your house. So yeah, rolling shutters outside are a certain thought, but it would be a struggle, A, to program them, like I said, but also B, to make them look somewhat nice. And at a certain point, you are just building your house to be a fortified compound, which probably isn't the worst idea ever either, as far as just like, hey, if there is a home invasion or something happening like that, you could just batten down all the hatches and close all the windows and possibly have one in front of your doors too that would put another layer of protection. Hailstorms would really be the biggest fear there. And yeah, they probably would get dinged and dented up in a hailstorm, but better the shutters than the windows being cracked. There's a lot of work in reframing and putting in new windows, particularly in old houses that have settled, well, even new houses that may have settled. So it would be way easier to replace a shutter than it would be a window. Anyways, we're supposed to be talking about video game news. Blue Archive from Nexion arrives on Steam and works on Linux, SteamOS, and Steam Deck. Okay. It's another one of these chibi anime games. And for some reason, you don't have a Steam link open next to it, so it must be further along. Last of Us Part 1 has got an AMD FSR and an audio fix for Steam Deck, which I don't think FSR 4 is something you can do on the Steam Deck, even the OLED version. So, yeah. So AMD FSR 4 support added for compatible AMD Radeon GPUs is not going to include the Steam Deck. In fairness, I'm not sure the Steam Deck would particularly work out particularly well if it did have FSR 4 going. The battery life might take a big hit with only minimal improvement on the graphics, because FSR is just the AMD version of DLSS as far as making fake frames and fake pixels. Here we can see The Last of Us Part 1 is still very popular on Steam, and is on sale during the summer sale. But I keep thinking that there's going to be a remastered version of this game that comes out on PC eventually. And you also are just kind of in this weird position where it's declining in relevance quickly here. People who have seen The Last of Us TV show are going to have that TV show as their favorite version of The Last of Us. People who have played Part 2 are going to be upset with Part 2 more than likely, so they're not going to really have that memorable experience. I am in a very lucky position here where I probably will never watch a TV show, and I'll probably never play Part 2, so I can at any time wait, first of all, for a remaster, and then second, just play the first game and pretend like the second game doesn't exist, which increasingly I think that is the way I want to play video games going forward, is no longer try and be a completionist and just make your own headcanon. The story does end at the end of Part 1's game. You get a satisfying ending, so a satisfying enough ending as far as I know. So there's really no reason to play Part 2 if you already know that there's controversy around it and people aren't going to, and you're probably not going to be happy with it. Of course, as a video game critic, I am taking a luxury there that I probably shouldn't, in the thought that I'd only play games that I know I'm going to have fun with, versus trying to play games to be an actual critic. But there's a lot of games and I've made a lot of footage, so I could see myself making that excuse, certainly. GeForce Now on Steam Deck really can be a game changer. Now that NVIDIA GeForce Now actually has an official dedicated app for the Steam Deck, the Gaming on Linux publisher has taken it for a spin and came away impressed. Disclosure, NVIDIA gave him access to the Ultimate subscription, so it is effectively a sponsored ad in what this article is. The problem with GeForce Now, though, is that you have to purchase the games, so you're effectively paying for a streaming service and paying full price for the games. And I think you get the games in a weird way, so it's not like you're getting, for instance, Spider-Man on Steam and then able to use that copy of Spider-Man on Steam to play on GeForce Now. You might be able to actually do that, I'm not sure. But yeah. Free for 1 hour to test, then $9.99 in pounds a month for a 1440p performance sub, or £20 a month for the ultimate sub with 4K HDR and 240 frames per second. 6-month discounts if you buy in bulk. You also need hardware. It is Steam integration, but apparently Steam integration is rubbish. There might be other ways to use GeForce Now to stream. Honestly, I guess now that I think about it, I don't know what this system really is. I thought that GeForce Now was the system where they had servers running the games for you. But I'm now wondering if GeForce Now means you have to have a computer connected to the internet running the games, and then you're just streaming it from your own computer at the price of up to $20 a month to a handheld. Which, yeah. Steam's remote play feature may not be perfect, but at least it doesn't cost you $20 a month to do the same thing. I don't foresee GeForce Now becoming a major contender, but I could see NVIDIA just keeping it around forever, just because. Finals is going to get a new kernel-based anti-cheat, but the dev says it will still work on Linux, SteamOS, and Steam Deck. Update, according to their community manager, they will still maintain the Linux platform support. So, I don't know what they are going to implement there. Some kind of device kernel module support, DKMS is what it's called, where you would implement something to work with the kernel, although I'm not sure that that even still technically is kernel level anti-cheat. That would be the way, though, to have something close to kernel level anti-cheat in Linux, is to make it a DKMS, because Linux, and Linus Torvalds in particular, is almost certainly not going to allow for the main kernel to have code for anti-cheat, unless you can make something that works really good for anti-cheat and proves to be useful for non-gamers. Also, something so necessary that it must be included in the kernel. Yeah. I guess we don't have too much else to say. We can point out that the finals is at 78% popularity in the last 30 days. And so it seems like it's still being played by a decent number of people as far as an online PvP game. And increasingly, I probably should just checkmark everything. Let's see, Postal 2 Redux gets a Steam page. I feel like we had already seen that announcement, but maybe they didn't have a Steam page. You can see these screenshots are not really showing you too much. CarX Street developers are optimizing for the Steam Deck and adapting their game for Linux, which is interesting, I guess. Although, when we look at this game, why is this even on my wish list? 63%, 69% overall. Seems like at some point it was rated much higher, but they have lost their audience. Let's see the graph. Yeah, a decent amount of negative reviews recently, but overall always a decent amount of reviews. Let's see. Constant connection errors makes it unplayable. The AI is unbeatable. New update has completely broken the game. Went from 80 to 100 frames per second to constant drops to 10 per second every other second. Yeah. So it does seem like there was some kind of update that tanked performance for one reason or another. Although weirdly, I'd also say I don't know why this game would have been on my wish list in the first place. I guess I'm always looking for racing games, but that definitely would have been the kind of soft listing on the wish list where, sure, if somebody gifted it to me, I'd be happy to have it, but I almost certainly would never even consider it as far as a purchase for myself. The Stop Killing Games consumer movement petition for UK people has hit some major milestones. I think it got over 1 million. I would say I think only UK people can sign the petition. No, not 1 million, 100,000. It has 126,000 as a time of writing. They probably need to get as many petition things anyways, though, because I wouldn't be surprised if the way these petitions go, they start searching the names of people and verifying the identity of people who signed it and start knocking the numbers back down. So you don't want it to be at exactly 100,000, because then they'd only have to find one out of 100,000 people to say they didn't actually sign the petition or not respond in some kind of verification. And I'm not sure this petition as it works in the UK is going to really lead to anything, but in fairness, in the United States there isn't really anything that can be done where the people can petition even a debate in the House of Representatives or the Senate. So yeah, the debate very well might come up in the House of Parliament in the UK, and then all of the politicians will say we're against this petition and the idea of preserving video games, and then that would be it. Or there's like 2 people in the parliament at the time debating it at most. Yeah. And there just wouldn't be enough of a quorum to actually vote on anything at all. It is the European Union that requires 10 times as many signatures at 1 million, which is at 977,000 as the time of writing. So again, the European Union petition, if you're a European Union citizen, still needs some love. But yeah, they've also had reports of non-citizens spoofing signatures of the European Union initiative, so it may be a little inflated. So yeah, if they could convince the European Union to implement some laws, which is probably a little bit higher of a chance that they might do something like that, it might have some influence worldwide. The European Union has had some influence worldwide, a little bit more than the UK would. But again, same scenario, it might get debated in a European Union meeting, but nothing may very well be done about it. In a lot of ways, this is the pretense of democracy more than the reality of a direct democracy. European Union, UK is definitely representative governments where representatives get elected and then they decide what they're going to do or not do, often because they're being influenced by other people other than their constituents. Moving on, the Mesa 25.1.5 brings more bug fixes for Linux graphics drivers, which I think this is going to be one of those articles that's just way too technical, so we'll scroll down and then move forward. And Steam hardware survey for June of 2025 is out. Here's the latest for Linux and SteamOS. And I looked at the hardware reviews, but I kind of prefer gaming on Linux to just cut it down and make it more of a narrative. Operating system stats were 95.67% Windows, 2.57% Linux, which is a drop for Linux and an increase for Windows, and 1.76% for macOS, which is also a drop for macOS. He says the drop for Linux can generally be associated with the increase in simplified Chinese as a language option in Steam. Pretty much every time it increases, Linux overall drops. Same again here. English dropped to 36.31%, and simplified Chinese rose to 26.73%. So interesting. I don't know if there's a causation there, but it's interesting that he sees a correlation there. That perhaps there are just more Windows users playing games who speak simplified Chinese. Is the current course for Linux on Steam. You can see that when the Steam Deck was released, what once was a fairly stagnant line started to slowly peak in value its way upward. And then the dotted line here would be your average growth. So it is on an upward trajectory, with a big boost once the Steam Deck OLED was released. And so anytime Linux usage starts to go down, if Valve actually cares about that, which is a big if, you may see them just announce a new handheld and then they may get another boost. It's still a weird situation though. If it isn't an official Valve Steam Deck though, there's less advertising and less pushing of that. And in fairness, Valve has not tried to put like ROG Ally listings on Steam. You cannot buy an ROG Ally or a Lenovo Legion Go S on Steam anywhere. So there is a lack of advertisement that's been happening that could have happened certainly if Lenovo said, hey, we want our games, our hardware to also be listed. Let's see. Those with an eagle eye or who bothered to look on the Steam Tracker page might notice something entirely new. They're now tracking Linux distros share on Steam over time here at Gaming on Linux 2. I thought it might be interesting to see the trends for certain distributions. It's a manual process and will take time to backfill, but it's already proving to be quite interesting. Here's the look. It looks a bit like this below, but far more interesting to look at properly as their charts are interactive. So Gaming on Linux now has its own chart, which they aren't linking to as far as I can tell. The link, I guess, maybe here. Yeah. And at this point, I've convinced myself I want to do Baslite and not try and install SteamOS. And not even waste the time, I don't think, to try and install SteamOS. Because I know I'm going to run into too many problems with SteamOS when I try to do weirder things like record. Even on OBS, that could be a problem. Yeah, got several numbers changing here, but Bakelite is up 2.37%, where SteamOS Hollow 64 is only up 0.09% or 0.09%, and other in total is beating Bakelite 42. That could include other versions of Bakelite also. And this Steam tracker isn't showing anything, so maybe I have to hide it. So we're going back to September of 2024. And this is other, popping up and popping down. And this is SteamOS Hollow. And so where is Bakelite? You can hide things. And scale just totally changes. So we want SteamOS to show, we want other to show. But effectively just don't care about the rest of these. Has a fancy fade out. So Linux Mint it was that one. So we have a red one. Here it is, Arch Linux. We have a white one, which is way down here, so that they only have like one spot for Bakelite. Okay. So Bakelite adoption is still much lower in total at 2.3% compared to SteamOS Hollow. Then they've got some languages here. I guess that's how they noticed the trend. You can see overall simplified Chinese is going up. As far as languages in Linux only, seems like simplified Chinese is going up, but Russian is also a big factor too. Moving on, we've got still like 4 GameDeveloper.com articles. Something definitely has changed at GameDeveloper.com. They just haven't been making 4 articles ever in their past for 2 or 3 days. It's usually 1 per week. Although in fairness, Patch Notes is really just a collection of smaller stories and rehashing a lot of stories they've already talked about. Apparently, Kotaku has been sold to the Gizmodo owner Kellyops, which feels like Kotaku and Gizmodo were under the same ownership in the past. Speaking of different ownership, I tried to listen to the most recent Giant Bombcast, and they rambled for at least, I would say, 10 minutes, and even one of the person at the very beginning said, "This is still a video game podcast, right?" Just as a joke. And I'm like, well, it's not really a joke. You're wasting a lot of people's time here rambling. So yeah, I couldn't even get deep enough into the podcast of the Giant Bombcast with its current collection of people in the way they talk to hear about them actually talk about video games. Which, yeah, that might have been one of the few things that Jeff Grossman was good about, is that he at least kind of kept things on track and tried to move it forward. And yeah, there might be kind of a need to keep things on track when you're recording in a studio in an office and people want to go home, versus everybody just live streaming from home already and having nothing better to do. But yeah, for this time I listened, it doesn't feel like the Giant Bombcast is really doing anything different or trying to do anything different, or as far as making things better. Which I don't even know what better really would be. It's just a remnant of the past, something that can't be recreated and wouldn't even be wanted if it was. Moving on, there's a report that 2K mobile studio Cat Daddy Games is making layoffs. The company is best known for working on mobile titles such as NBA 2K Mobile and NFL 2K Playmakers. Yeah, more layoffs. Speculation at least. There's a report that Romero Games is making layoffs after Microsoft canceled project funding. Which, again, is believable. And probably does also highlight a example here where obviously these kinds of stories could have been talked about by GameDeveloper.com in the past, and they were just actively not bothering to do it, and now they are. Which, yeah, having like one article a day or one news article a day is a little too few. Unity has promised stronger AI copyright guardrails after an employee conjures Mickey Mouse on stream. Unity says it's building a better copyright mousetrap. Although the Mickey Mouse from Steamboat Willie is technically in public domain, so I don't know if there was really any violation of Mickey Mouse or copyright there. But there's another thing that Unity was trying to do, and then they immediately backed down from it, in that they were forcing all new projects to be created in their cloud system, so that the project would automatically upload and back up to their cloud servers, instead of being able to make a local project in a local file on your computer. Yeah. I hope at some point there is just some kind of lawsuit that stops AI, or it slows it down. And maybe it just needs to be a new law. Let's say slow down AI and stop it for a second. Let's think about what we're doing to society and how ridiculous this is all becoming, because nobody is considering ramifications, and the people that are implementing AI don't care about the ramifications. They don't care about the immediate ramifications of the massive amount of money and energy and water they're using to run these AI algorithms, and they don't care about the fact that it is leading to the layoff of a lot of people now, and potentially a lot more people in the future. These are people who are not of good conscience, or not considering their actions at the very least. And I'll just leave it at that, because I don't want to get into a big rant. And that brings us to all the new games on Steam, and everything does seem like it ordered itself fairly well, so we should just be able to go through this somewhat quickly. Some of these games, though, seem like they are being listed twice. That Brain Rot Battle Royale in particular is a game I think I've seen before, even though it says it came out July 4th. And I let my macro run and it didn't have any problems today, so it might be a case where, yeah, I'm gonna say no to this. My macro today is gonna end up going back. Generic name like scary game. Apparently the anime I watched that was so what I reincarnated as a spider is like a 4-year-old anime. It's just now making it to Hulu, or perhaps remaking it to Hulu for a additional time. So even in that case, it's in a weird situation where it didn't really end. Maybe they are just waiting for 5 to 10 years to make a sequel, which does happen more often these days in anime, is that you get one season and then there's a lot of assumption that you would just read the light novel, the book, the manga to get the rest of the story. But then eventually, after what often is way too long of an amount of time for anybody to care, they come out with a season 2 to try and renew interest in it. Some of that might have been COVID related as far as the delays. I did watch an old video of the Cracking the Cryptic people playing the game The Witness, which is another old game certainly. And I was kind of disappointed in that they kind of figured out a major secret pretty early, it seemed like, in the whole experience. So I don't know if there's really any reason to be surprised when you're talking people who are just like some of the best puzzle solvers in the world, actually rated, actually going to competitions and winning. But yeah, it definitely felt like that kind of experience gets hurt if you're too clever, because you just don't have enough time to build familiarity with what you would expect from a world before you, particularly in The Witness, have the revelation that there is something more to that world. And I do have to say also, I am increasingly not happy, I guess is the best way to say it, with Jonathan Blow as a game developer. He takes too long to make his games. He's too pretentious for as many games as he has made and how long he takes them. And like, the more I know about him, the less I like about him, which really probably just points out that I should not really know anything about him in the first place. We have a new Princess Maker out. Interesting. Princess Maker Child of Revelation. Is this supposed to be another reboot or remake of the first game? It kind of feels like it is. Or maybe this is an attempt to twist things around and modernize the gameplay. Yeah. Because notice you have like a currency here, a clock, and then it looks like more mini games and interactions that you really are going to engage with. And it seems like you have maybe direct control when it's out and about doing dungeon raid type things. Well, that is intriguing. It is worth also pointing out that all of the Princess Maker games in their release forms and re-release forms have had trouble being in the reviews department. Just a lot of complaints overall. This is Blue Archive, so go ahead and just show it. Let's see. Awake might be something, probably not. Yeah. I'm wondering about when is the tradition, and I guess it's probably just puberty and influence of your friends. When you have kids that are sweet and not interested in horror and blood and guts and shooting and zombies and things like that. And then I assume there will be a tradition for most, and that they start to engage with that more. Otherwise, there's going to be a weird situation where a lot of old games on Steam may have no appeal to the next generation, which I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of them actually don't have appeal. But it would be weird, certainly, if you said, hey, there's a whole new generation of gamers that just refuse to play Resident Evil 4 because it's got zombies in it and it's spooky. But yeah, I assume there's just kind of a tradition, a transition there that happens slowly. It's just influence. It's perhaps not ever a smooth transition, in that I don't think there's really a great kind of spooky show or movie to show somebody. In a funny way, Spirited Away is perhaps the closest thing. It has like scary elements, and some of those older animated Disney movies might have scary elements and provoke emotion. And yeah, I think there might be a rant to be made that more modern kids movies are actively trying to not provoke any emotions at all. Let's see. This game is called Lixing, L-I-X-I-N-G, Picross World, and it is an anime girl in a bikini top, and it's just Picross otherwise. So I won't show that. But yeah, evoking fear and aggression, violence, in fictional formats might happen less and less. While overall, I like the idea of a whole generation of sweet and soft people who are not hardened by a warlike mentality. I don't know if that really is going to stay around, and I don't know if that isn't just going to leave a generation vulnerable to being abused by the few sociopaths or narcissists out there that aren't going to have trouble being aggressive. Yeah, as far as forms of entertainment, I guess Halloween probably plays a big role in that too. It's that if you're not engaging in Halloween in any way, you're probably not experiencing the little spooky kid frights to prepare you for spookier things. Yeah, that would definitely make a weird scenario as far as gamers go. If there was just a whole new generation of gamers that refuse to play anything scary or anything violent. Violence in particular would be crazy. That would eliminate so many games. yeah, my general assumption is that there's just a point where puberty kicks in, testosterone and other hormones kick in, and then teenagers, preteens often just become edgelords and go through a bit of a goth phase, which, yeah, probably isn't a terrible thing. You just grin and bear it as a parent, I would assume, with having very little choice otherwise. That the more you rage against it, the harder they're going to stick to it, and become a goth for the rest of their life. Not that there's anything wrong with being a goth, it's just, I think it's probably not the real personality of a lot of people who go through goth phases. Particularly to get back to games, though, there's still a, I mean, and there just always will be until some new company comes out. And I guess if I had infinite money, I should probably fund that new company to say, hey, we're going to make the age 10 to 16 demographic style of games. We're going to try and make games that are the transition to people playing things like Mario Odyssey and Mario Kart, and maybe Metroid, which even Metroid is really not that violent or hardcore. And we're going to try and make something that is slightly more mature than those games, but nowhere as mature as Resident Evil 4. But we're going to have several generations of games, or several different styles of games where there are games for like 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, getting close to Resident Evil 4 by the time they're 15. And then we have the follow list cleanup, which still really don't have too much as far as on the follow list. Seems like Two Heart is putting out some notes, and that's about it. And then we're at the end of the show, and I don't think we did have any opened duplicate games there, so either something happened to fix that, or it didn't happen in the first place. I guess it didn't happen in the first place. And weirdly, we're below 3 hours, which was a good thing. Didn't feel like we looked at as many games as we should have, though. It felt like it was the right amount of news. Anyways, though, it's not worth wondering about it. Let's just end this stream so I can try and rest up and hopefully get healthier. So, as always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.